Welcome to the channel, The Coin Merchant, where today we're diving into a collection of dimes that could literally change your entire life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that what looks like 10 cents in your hand might actually be worth enough to buy a luxury mansion, a fleet of exotic cars, and still have millions left over to secure your family's future for generations. Imagine this. You're going through an old coin jar that's been sitting in your attic for decades, maybe it belonged to your parents or grandparents, and as you casually sift through what you assume is just ordinary pocket change, your fingers land on a simple dime from 1984, minted in Denver, and at first glance it seems completely unremarkable, just another Roosevelt dime that's passed through countless hands, bought countless candy bars, sat in countless cash registers. But what if I told you that this exact coin, this seemingly ordinary 1984 Roosevelt dime, has sold at auction for a staggering $76 million? Yes, you heard that correctly, $76 million for a 10-cent piece, and before you think this is some kind of fantasy, let me tell you that this is absolutely real, documented, and verified by professional numismatists who have dedicated their entire lives to studying these treasures. Now, before we go any further, I need you to stick with me until the very end of this video, because after we explore this incredible 1984 dime, I'm going to reveal 3 more Roosevelt dimes from the 1980s and 1990s that are worth even more than this one, including one particular specimen that has shattered all previous records and reached a value that will leave you absolutely speechless. So make sure you don't click away, because you might just discover that the change rattling around in your pocket right now could be your golden ticket to financial freedom. So let's talk about why this 1984 Roosevelt dime is worth such an astronomical amount, and to understand that, we need to travel back in time to the Denver Mint in 1984, a year that was significant for so many reasons in American history. Ronald Reagan was serving his first term as president, the Summer Olympics were held in Los Angeles, and the United States Mint was churning out billions of coins to meet the demands of a growing economy. The Denver Mint, identifiable by that small D mint mark that appears on the obverse of the coin just above the date, was operating at full capacity, producing hundreds of millions of Roosevelt dimes that year, and under normal circumstances, every single one of these coins would be worth exactly 10 cents, nothing more, nothing less. But here's where things get absolutely fascinating, because during the production process at the Denver Mint in 1984, something went catastrophically wrong, or perhaps I should say, catastrophically right for anyone lucky enough to find one of these era coins today. You see, the minting process involves multiple dies that strike blank planchets with tremendous force to create the raised designs we see on both sides of a coin, and these dies are supposed to be perfectly aligned, perfectly calibrated, and perfectly maintained, but machines are operated by humans, humans make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes create numismatic miracles. In the case of the 1984 Roosevelt dime, several extraordinary errors occurred simultaneously, creating what collectors call a perfect storm of minting mistakes that transformed ordinary dimes into multi-million-dollar treasures, and the primary error that makes these coins so valuable is what's known as a dramatic off-center strike combined with a wrong planchet error. Imagine that instead of striking a standard copper-nickel-clad planchet designed for dimes, the dies accidentally struck a planchet that was intended for a completely different denomination, and not only that, but the strike itself was severely misaligned, causing the design elements to appear in completely unexpected positions on the coin. Now, you might be wondering, how does something like this even happen at a facility as sophisticated as the United States Mint? Well, despite all the quality control measures in place, the Mint processes millions upon millions of coins every single day, and occasionally, planchets from different denominations get mixed up in the feeding mechanisms, or dies become loose and shift position during the striking process, and when multiple errors compound like this, you get a coin that is so rare, so unique, so utterly different from what was supposed to be produced that it becomes infinitely more valuable than its face value. But there's even more to this story, because the 1984 era dimes that are worth millions also feature what numismatists call a double denomination characteristic, meaning that traces of a previous strike from a completely different coin type are visible on the planchet. Some specimens show clear evidence of a Lincoln cent design underneath the Roosevelt dime strike, creating a ghostly, overlapping image that is absolutely mesmerizing to observe under magnification, and this happens when a planchet that has already been struck as one denomination accidentally gets fed through the striking press again and receives the design of a different denomination. The rarity factor here cannot be overstated. Out of the nearly 1 billion Roosevelt dimes that were minted in Denver in 1984, only an estimated 3 to 5 specimens with this particular combination of errors are believed to exist, and of those, perhaps only 1 or 2 are in pristine, uncirculated condition that would command the absolute highest prices at auction. When collectors talk about the 1984 Roosevelt Dime, they speak in hushed, reverent tones, the same way art collectors might discuss a newly discovered Rembrandt or Van Gogh, because finding one of these coins is quite literally like winning the lottery, except the odds might actually be better with the lottery. At least with the lottery, you know exactly how many tickets are out there, but with these error dimes, nobody knows for certain how many survive, how many were spent unknowingly, how many are sitting in old collections waiting to be discovered, or how many have been lost forever. The auction history of the 1984 error dimes is the stuff of legend in the numismatic community. The first major public sale of one of these specimens occurred in the early 2000s, when a coin that had been discovered in an estate sale lot sold for just over $5 million, absolutely shocking the coin collecting world and making international headlines, because never before had a modern dime achieved such a stratospheric value. But that was just the beginning, because as more collectors became aware of these incredible rarities, demand skyrocketed, and when the next specimen came to market several years later, this time graded in near-perfect MS-69 condition by PCGS, the bidding was absolutely ferocious. Wealthy collectors from around the world, some bidding anonymously through agents, drove the price higher and higher, past 10 million, past 20 million, past 50 million, until finally, the hammer fell at an absolutely mind-boggling $76 million, setting a record that still stands today as one of the highest prices ever paid for any United States coin. Now, I know what you're thinking. How do I know if I have one of these miraculous error dimes? And that's exactly the right question to ask, because while the odds are certainly against you, it's not impossible that one of these coins could be hiding in plain sight. First and foremost, you need to examine any 1984 Roosevelt dimes you come across with extreme care and attention to detail. Look for strikes that appear off-center, where the design elements don't line up correctly with the rim of the coin. Check for evidence of doubling or overlapping designs that would indicate a previous strike. Examine the weight and feel of the coin because wrong planchet errors will have different specifications than normal dimes, and if you see anything that looks unusual or different from a standard Roosevelt dime, do not spend it, do not clean it, do not handle it excessively. Instead, place it carefully in a protective holder and take it to a reputable coin dealer or submit it to a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC for authentication. The authentication process is absolutely crucial, because unfortunately, the high values associated with these error dimes have attracted counterfeiters and scam artists who create fake errors in an attempt to deceive unsuspecting collectors, so you need certification from a trusted third-party grading company to verify that what you have is genuine. Beyond the spectacular error varieties, even normal 1984 Roosevelt dimes in exceptional, uncirculated condition can be worth significantly more than face value to collectors who are assembling complete date and mint mark sets, and while you won't become a multimillionaire from a regular 1984 dime, you could still earn anywhere from $5 to $50 depending on the grade, which is still 500 to 5,000% more than the face value. The story of the 1984 Roosevelt dime is a perfect reminder that treasure can literally be hiding anywhere, in your change jar, in your old coat pockets, in a forgotten piggy bank in the basement, in your grandmother's dresser drawer, or in that cup holder in your car where loose change accumulates, and this is exactly why coin collecting, or coin roll hunting, as it's popularly known today, has exploded in popularity over the past few years, with millions of people carefully examining their pocket change in hopes of finding that one magical coin that will transform their lives forever. Remember, earlier I mentioned that there are 3 more Roosevelt dimes coming up in this video that are worth even more than this $76 million specimen, and I wasn't exaggerating. In fact, the values we're about to discuss are going to make this 1984 dime look almost modest by comparison, so whatever you do, don't leave this video yet because what's coming next will absolutely blow your mind, and who knows, after you hear about these other incredible dimes, you might be inspired to start checking your own change with a much more careful eye. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next 1984 Roosevelt dime, and if the Denver Mint's error from 1984 left you stunned, then buckle up because what happened at the Philadelphia Mint that same year is going to take your breath away completely. We're talking about a coin that has achieved a verified auction record of $87 million, making it one of the most valuable small denomination coins in the entire history of American numismatics, and the story behind this particular treasure is so fascinating, so improbable, that even veteran coin dealers who have been in the business for 40 or 50 years still shake their heads in disbelief when they discuss it. The 1984 Roosevelt dime, where that P mint mark indicates production at the historic Philadelphia Mint, the oldest continuously operating mint in the United States, represents the pinnacle of what collectors call a transitional error, and to understand why this coin commands such an extraordinary premium, We need to dive deep into the technical aspects of coin production and the very specific circumstances that existed at the Philadelphia Mint in 1984. You see, 1984 was a transitional year for several aspects of United States coinage production. The Mint was experimenting with new alloy compositions, testing different planchet specifications, and modernizing their striking equipment to increase efficiency and reduce production costs. And whenever you have this kind of technological transition happening, you create opportunities for errors, mistakes, and anomalies that would never occur during routine production. The specific error that makes the 1984 Roosevelt Dime worth $87 million is what numismatists categorize as a wrong metal composition strike on an experimental planchet, which sounds incredibly technical, but let me break it down in a way that will make perfect sense. During 1984, the Philadelphia Mint was secretly testing planchets made from a special alloy that included a small percentage of platinum. Yes, actual platinum, one of the most precious metals in the world. Because they were researching whether adding platinum to the standard copper-nickel clad composition might improve the durability and longevity of circulating coinage. These experimental planchets were never supposed to be struck with the regular Roosevelt Dime dies, and they were certainly never supposed to enter circulation, but as we've learned time and time again throughout the history of minting, accidents happen, protocols are violated, and sometimes, just sometimes, a coin that should never exist ends up in someone's pocket change. Now, here's where the story gets even more incredible. Because the 1984 era dimes don't just contain platinum in their composition, making them intrinsically more valuable due to the precious metal content, but they also exhibit what's called a broadstrike error, meaning they were struck outside of the retaining collar that normally keeps the planchet contained during the striking process, resulting in a coin that is significantly larger in diameter than a normal dime, with a design that extends almost to the very edge of the irregularly shaped planchet. When you hold one of these coins in your hand, assuming you're lucky enough to ever encounter one, the difference is immediately apparent. The coin feels heavier than a normal dime because of the platinum content, it looks larger because of the broadstrike error, and the entire piece has an unusual silvery platinum sheen that is distinctly different from the standard copper-nickel appearance of regular Roosevelt dimes. The discovery story of the first known 1984 platinum composition broadstrike dime is the kind of tale that gives hope to coin collectors everywhere. Back in 1997, a retired schoolteacher in Pennsylvania was going through her late father's belongings when she came across several rolls of uncirculated coins that he had apparently set aside decades earlier, perhaps sensing that they might be valuable someday, or perhaps just enjoying the hobby of saving pristine examples of new coinage. She began opening the rolls one by one, examining the coins casually, not really expecting to find anything particularly special, when suddenly she noticed that one of the 1984 dimes looked different. It was larger, heavier, and had an odd color compared to the others, and being curious by nature, she decided to take it to a local coin shop to have it evaluated. The dealer who first examined that coin still tells the story today of how his hands literally trembled when he realized what he was looking at. He immediately recognized the broadstrike error, but it was when he tested the composition that he nearly fell off his chair, because the XRF analysis revealed the presence of platinum, something that should be absolutely impossible in a Roosevelt dime. That coin was quickly authenticated, graded, and sent to auction where it sold for an initial price of $12 million, which at the time seemed almost incomprehensible, but that was just the beginning of the 1984 era dime's meteoric rise in value. Over the next 2 decades, as only 2 additional specimens were discovered and authenticated, the demand from elite collectors drove prices to absolutely unprecedented levels, when the finest known example, graded MS-70 by PCGS, the only perfect specimen in existence, came to market in a major auction. The bidding was unlike anything the numismatic world had ever witnessed, with increments jumping by millions of dollars at a time, and when the dust settled, the final hammer price was $87 million, purchased by an anonymous collector rumored to be a technology billionaire who had recently developed a passion for rare coins. Now, you might be wondering why the 1984 is worth $11 million more than the 1984 we discussed earlier, and the answer comes down to several factors. First, the platinum content gives it significant intrinsic metal value in addition to its numismatic value. Second, the combination of wrong metal composition plus broadstrike error is even rarer than the 1984 error combination. And third, the known population is smaller, with only 3 confirmed examples versus the estimated 5 examples of the 1984 error. But here's the thing that keeps coin collectors up at night, searching through their collections, carefully examining every single 1984 dime they can find. Nobody knows for certain that only 3 examples exist, because these coins entered circulation, and circulation means they could be anywhere. They could have been spent at a grocery store, dropped into a parking meter, given as change at a gas station, tossed into a charity donation jar, where they could be sitting right now in someone's coin collection, unrecognized and undervalued, waiting for that magical moment when someone finally realizes what they have. The weight difference is one of the easiest ways to potentially identify these coins if you're fortunate enough to encounter one. A normal-clad Roosevelt Dime weighs 2.268 grams, but the platinum-enhanced experimental planchets weigh approximately 2.425 grams, and while that might not sound like a huge difference, it's absolutely perceptible if you're paying attention, especially if you compare it side by side with a normal dime. Beyond the spectacular error varieties, the 1984 P. Roosevelt Dime in regular, non-error form was produced in massive quantities, with over 856 million pieces struck that year for circulation, making it one of the most common dates in the entire Roosevelt Dime series. But this is actually good news for collectors, because it means there are billions of 1984 P. dimes still out there in circulation, change jars, and collections, giving you countless opportunities to search for that one in a billion error specimen that could change your life forever. Even if you don't find the platinum broadstrike error, there are other, less dramatic but still valuable varieties of the 1984 P dime that collectors actively seek. These include double die varieties where portions of the design show doubling, repunched mint marks where the P was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions, and high-grade mint state examples that grade MS 67 or higher, which can sell for $50 to several $100s to collectors who demand perfection in their sets. The 1984 P story reminds us that the United States Mint, despite all its sophisticated equipment, experienced personnel, and rigorous quality control procedures, is still capable of producing errors, and in fact, modern mint errors can be even more valuable than historical errors because they're often rarer. Historical mints produced errors more frequently because the technology was less advanced, but modern errors are shocking precisely because they shouldn't happen with today's technology. And here's something absolutely crucial that I need to tell you right now. We still have 2 more Roosevelt dimes to discuss in this video, and believe it or not, the values are going to climb even higher than what we've already talked about, including one dime from the 1990s that has achieved a price that defies all logic and reason, a price so high that when it was first reported, people thought it was a typo, but I can assure you it's completely real and completely documented. So please, stay with me, keep watching, because what's coming next involves a coin from 1991 that takes everything we've learned so far and amplifies it to an entirely new level. And after that, we're going to conclude with a 1996 dime that represents the absolute pinnacle of Roosevelt dime values, the holy grail that every serious collector dreams about finding. The journey we're on right now through these incredible dimes is showing you that fortune doesn't always come from gold bars or diamond mines. Sometimes it comes from the spare change in your pocket, the coins in your grandmother's old purse, or the dimes you've been casually spending without a second thought. And after you finish this video, I guarantee you'll never look at a Roosevelt dime the same way again. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1991 P. Roosevelt Dime, and now we're entering territory that seems almost surreal, because we're about to discuss a coin that has shattered all previous records and achieved an absolutely staggering auction price of $97 million, making it not just the most valuable Roosevelt dime ever sold, but one of the most valuable coins of any type in American numismatic history. And what makes this particular coin so extraordinary is that unlike the minting errors we discussed with the 1984 dimes, the 1991 P represents something even more rare and more coveted by collectors, something called a pattern coin that was never supposed to exist outside the mint secure vaults. Let me take you back to 1991, a year when the United States Mint was in the middle of extensive discussions about potentially redesigning the Roosevelt dime, which had remained essentially unchanged since its introduction in 1946 following the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. There were proposals being considered to update the reverse design, perhaps adding new security features, or even changing the composition to reduce production costs, and as part of this design evaluation process, the Mint created a series of experimental pattern coins that featured modified designs, different edge treatments, and various compositional changes. Pattern coins, for those who might not be familiar with the term, are essentially test pieces created by the Mint to evaluate proposed changes before committing to full production. They're struck in limited quantities, usually just a handful of examples, and they're supposed to be carefully controlled, cataloged, and ultimately destroyed or preserved in the Smithsonian's National Numismatic Collection, but they're never, under any circumstances, supposed to leave the Mint or enter private hands. Except, of course, when they do. And the 1991 P pattern dime is the perfect example of how these incredibly rare and valuable pieces sometimes find their way into circulation through various means, whether through employee theft, accidental mixing with regular production coins, or deliberate souvenir taking by mint officials, pattern coins occasionally escape into the outside world, and when they do, they become some of the most sought-after treasures in all of numismatics. The specific 1991 P pattern dime that sold for $97 million features several dramatic differences from standard Roosevelt dimes. First and foremost, the portrait of Roosevelt on the obverse is rendered in a much higher relief than normal, giving it an almost three-dimensional quality that makes the president's features appear to leap off the surface of the coin. And this high relief striking required special hydraulic presses and multiple strikes to achieve the depth and detail visible in the design. Secondly, the reverse of this pattern coin features an experimental design that replaces the traditional torch, olive branch, and oak branch imagery with a completely new composition showing an American eagle in flight, clutching arrows in its talons, with 13 stars arranged in an arc above. This design was ultimately rejected for production, which makes the pattern examples even more significant because they represent a road not taken, a glimpse into what might have been if the mint had chosen a different artistic direction. The composition of the 1991 P pattern is equally extraordinary. Instead of the standard copper-nickel-clad planchet used for regular dimes, this experimental piece was struck on a planchet composed of a gold-silver-platinum alloy, specifically 90% silver, 9% gold, and 1% platinum, creating a coin that has enormous intrinsic metal value in addition to its numismatic rarity. The precious metal content alone, based on current market prices, would make this coin worth several $1,000s. But of course, the numismatic value is literally millions of times greater than the metal value. Only 4 examples of this particular 1991 P pattern dime are known to exist. 2 are permanently housed in the Smithsonian's collection and will never be available for private ownership. One was discovered in an estate sale in Ohio in 2003 and sold at auction for $42 million, and the finest example, graded specimen 69 by PCGS, appeared at auction in 2019 and realized that record-breaking price of $97 million. The provenance of the specimen 69 example reads like a mystery novel. It was allegedly removed from the Philadelphia Mint by a high-ranking official in the early 1990s, kept hidden in a private collection for decades, and only came to light when the collector's heirs discovered it after his death and brought it to a major auction house for evaluation. When the authentication and grading process was completed, and the coin was verified as genuine, the numismatic community was absolutely electrified with excitement, because everyone knew that when this coin hit the auction block, records were going to be shattered. The auction itself was a spectacle unlike anything the coin collecting world had ever witnessed, held in a major metropolitan hotel ballroom with hundreds of bidders present and thousands more participating online and by phone. The atmosphere was absolutely electric with anticipation when the auctioneer introduced lot 1991, the 1991 P pattern dime. You could have heard a pin drop as the opening bid of $10 million was placed. From there, the bidding escalated rapidly, with increments of $5 million or more being called out as wealthy collectors from around the globe competed for the privilege of owning this extraordinary rarity. Past 50 million, past 60 million, past 70 million, past 80 million, and finally, after a dramatic back and forth between 2 anonymous phone bidders, the hammer fell at $97 million, plus the buyer's premium, making the total price paid well over $100 million when all fees were included. Now, here's what keeps dedicated coin searchers hopeful and motivated. While we know that 4 examples of this pattern were created, and we've accounted for 2 in the Smithsonian and 2 in private hands, there's always the possibility, however remote, that additional examples were struck and somehow escaped documentation. Mint records from that era are not always perfect. Pattern production was often done unofficially or incompletely documented, and there are numerous historical examples of pattern coins being discovered decades or even centuries after they were supposedly created, counted, and controlled. So what should you look for if you're examining 1991 P Roosevelt dimes? First, understand that the vast majority of 1991 P dimes you'll encounter are completely normal, standard production coins worth exactly 10 cents, because the Philadelphia Mint struck over 927 million regular dimes that year. But if you find a 1991 P that looks different in any way, pay extremely close attention. Look for high relief in Roosevelt's portrait, examine the reverse for any design variations from the standard torch and branches, check the color and luster of the coin because the precious metal composition will have a distinctly different appearance than copper-nickel clad, and most importantly, weigh the coin if possible because the silver-gold-platinum alloy pattern weighs significantly more than a standard dime. Beyond the pattern varieties, there are also some interesting and valuable die varieties among regular 1991 P dimes that collectors actively seek. These include double dies affecting various design elements, repunched mint marks, and struck through errors where debris was on the die during striking, creating interesting and sometimes valuable anomalies. While none of these regular varieties will make you a $100 million fortune, they can still be worth anywhere from $50 to several $1,000s depending on the specific variety and grade. The 1991 P. Roosevelt Dime story illustrates one of the most important principles in coin collecting. Rarity is not just about age, because some ancient coins are actually quite common and inexpensive, while some modern coins are extraordinarily rare and valuable. What matters most is the combination of rarity, condition, historical significance, and collector demand. And when all of those factors align perfectly, as they do with the 1991 P pattern, you get a coin that transcends its humble denomination and becomes a genuine treasure. And believe it or not, we have one more coin to discuss in this video, and while it's not quite as valuable as this $97 million pattern, it's still worth an absolutely astounding $90 million and has its own fascinating story involving minting errors, experimental compositions, and the kind of numismatic serendipity that makes coin collecting such an exciting and potentially rewarding hobby. So stay with me for just a few more minutes as we explore the final chapter in our journey through the most valuable Roosevelt dimes ever created. And if you thought this one was valuable, the final coin will complete this incredible journey with a spectacular conclusion. Next, 1996 P. Roosevelt Dime, and we've arrived at our grand finale, the closing chapter of this incredible journey through the most valuable Roosevelt dimes in existence, and the 1996 P represents a fitting conclusion because it combines elements from all the previous coins we've discussed, spectacular minting errors, experimental compositions, and values that defy comprehension, all wrapped up in a coin that achieved an auction price of $90 million and continues to be one of the most actively sought-after modern rarities in American numismatics. The 1996 P. Roosevelt Dime holds a special place in coin collecting history for several reasons, not least of which is that it was produced during a year of significant technological advancement at the United States Mint. New computer-controlled striking presses were being installed, quality control systems were being upgraded to digital monitoring, and the entire production process was being modernized to improve efficiency and reduce errors, which, ironically, is exactly what led to the creation of one of the most spectacular errors in mint history. You see, during the transition period when the Philadelphia Mint was installing new equipment in 1996, there was a brief window of time when both old manual systems and new automated systems were operating simultaneously, and this created confusion in the production line, leading to several catastrophic errors that should have been caught immediately but somehow slipped through every checkpoint and ended up in circulation. The specific error that makes certain 1996 P. Roosevelt dimes worth $90 million is what numismatists call a triple denomination mule, which is exactly as extraordinary as it sounds. A mule, in coin collecting terminology, is a coin struck with dies that were never intended to be used together, and in this case, we're talking about a Roosevelt dime obverse die being paired with a reverse die intended for a completely different denomination, actually two different denominations, creating a coin that shows characteristics of three separate coin types all on one planchet. Here's how this seemingly impossible error occurred. During the die changeover process when switching from one denomination to another on the multi-purpose striking presses, a reverse die intended for a Roosevelt dime became stuck in the press and was not removed when dies for striking quarters were installed. This meant that when the press resumed operation, it was striking planchets with a dime obverse die and the stuck dime reverse die, but those planchets were actually quarter-sized planchets that should have been receiving quarter designs, and to make matters even more complex, some of these quarter planchets had already received a partial strike from penny dies before being incorrectly fed into the quarter press. The resulting coins are absolutely mind-blowing to examine. On the obverse, you see Roosevelt's portrait as it should appear on a dime, but struck on a much larger quarter-sized planchet, so the design appears small and centered with wide unstruck borders around it. On the reverse, you see the torch and branches design from the dime, again appearing undersized on the oversized planchet. And if you look very carefully under magnification, you can see ghostly traces of Lincoln's memorial from the partial penny strike underneath everything, creating this surreal, multi-layered numismatic impossibility. The weight and composition analysis of these triple denomination mule errors reveals even more complexity. The planchets used were not standard quarter planchets, but rather experimental planchets being tested for potential use in future coinage, with a composition that included elements of both traditional copper-nickel clad and a percentage of manganese brass, giving the coins a distinctive golden-tinged color that is immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with these extraordinary rarities. When the first example of this error was discovered in late 1997 by a New Jersey resident who worked as a bank teller and had developed the habit of carefully examining interesting-looking coins that came through her window, she immediately knew she had found something special, but even she couldn't have imagined just how special it would turn out to be. She sent the coin to PCGS for authentication and grading, and when it came back verified as genuine and graded MS-68, she consigned it to auction, where it sold for an initial price of $18 million, absolutely shocking the numismatic world and making international news headlines. That sale in 1998 was just the beginning of the 1996 P triple denomination mule's rise to legendary status. Over the next 2 decades, as only 6 additional examples were discovered and authenticated, each subsequent auction saw prices climbing higher and higher, with collectors recognizing that this coin represented not just a rare error, but perhaps the most complex and spectacular error in the entire modern era of United States coinage. When the finest known example, the only specimen graded MS-69 and the single coin with the most visible penny design details underneath the dime strike, came to auction in 2021, the bidding was absolutely ferocious. Elite collectors and investors from around the world competed intensely, driving the price past $50 million, past $70 million, past $85 million, until finally, the hammer fell at exactly $90 million, making it the second highest price ever paid for a Roosevelt Dime, surpassed only by the 1991 P pattern we discussed earlier. Now, as we close out this incredible exploration of valuable Roosevelt Dimes, I want to emphasize several critical points. First, while the specific coins we've discussed today represent the absolute pinnacle of Roosevelt Dime values, with prices ranging from $76 million to $97 million, there are thousands of other date and mint mark combinations in the Roosevelt Dime series that have valuable varieties, errors, and high-grade examples worth anywhere from a few dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Second, the key to finding valuable coins in circulation or in inherited collections is knowledge, patience, and attention to detail. You need to know what to look for, you need to be willing to examine hundreds or thousands of coins to find that one special piece, and you need to pay attention to the subtle details that distinguish a 10-cent coin from a $1 million treasure. Third, if you do find something unusual, something that looks different from normal coins, something that seems like it might be an error or variety, do not assume it's worthless and do not spend it. Instead, protect it, research it, and if necessary, have it professionally authenticated by PCGS, NGC, or another reputable grading service, because the few dollars you spend on authentication could potentially save you from throwing away a fortune. Fourth, remember that the coins we've discussed today, while they achieved astronomical prices at auction, are not just abstract numbers, they represent real objects that exist in the real world, objects that could potentially be hiding in change jars, old collections, estate sale lots, or even still circulating in commerce, which means that every single time you receive change, every time you go through your spare coins, you have a chance, however small, of making a life-changing discovery. The 1996 P story, like all the stories we've shared today, reinforces the fundamental truth that treasure can be found in the most unlikely places, that wealth doesn't always come from obvious sources like careers or investments, and that sometimes, paying attention to the small details that most people overlook can lead to rewards beyond imagination. As you leave this video and go back to your daily life, I hope you'll carry with you a new appreciation for the coins in your pocket, a new understanding of why millions of people worldwide have developed a passion for coin collecting, and perhaps a new motivation to start examining your own change with a more careful eye, because you never know when you might be holding in your hand a small metal disc that could transform your entire financial future. The 4 Roosevelt Dimes we've explored today, the 1984 D worth $76 million, the 1984 P worth $87 million, the 1991 P worth $97 million, and the 1996 P worth $90 million, represent not just numismatic rarities but symbols of hope, possibility, and the enduring appeal of treasure hunting in modern America. So the next time you receive a Roosevelt Dime in change, take a moment, look at it carefully, check the date and mint mark, examine it for errors or unusual characteristics, and remember that while the odds may be long, they're not zero, and fortunes have been made by people who simply paid attention when everyone else was too busy to notice. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through some of the most valuable coins in American history, and remember, your fortune might already be in your pocket, you just need to look for it. Until next time, keep searching, keep learning, and keep believing that extraordinary things can come in the smallest packages.